All right. Okay, thanks guys for coming. Some of you from a long way, so I'll just get this started with this video.
Now know that information has become dangerous. From social media to biased news, we have an answer. ThinkCitizen. At ThinkCit, we aggregate the news.
We take the news and remove misleading information.
We do this with our validity code. Basically, we purify the news, cross-check it with other news sources, and republish the new and purified version on our website. ThinkCitizen.
This is the new news, and it's news that helps society. Honest news, fun news.
We do the hard thinking.
So the information you get makes you better thinkers, the new generation of united citizens.
We do not wait for some legislation
Or media tycoon to gain a conscience.
truth over profit, bringing together rather than dividing.
We are taking charge of information to make it better for our generation. We are ThinkCitizen. We are ThinkCitizens.
We are ThinkCitizen. We are ThinkCitizen.
We are big systems.
We are big citizens.
We are big systems.
We are ThinkCitizens.
Okay, so whoops. Just thought I should introduce you to the team in Bristol with whom we started ThinkCitizen with, and I'll talk a bit about them as the talk goes on. So. This is the election course. Is an election happening in about 4 weeks, 3 weeks now, and these courses are meant to empower people to become independent thinkers in the mass media age so that we are less vulnerable to all the promises and whether they're true or not, and all the propaganda that is going to come your way in the next 3 or so weeks. Last week we looked at identity. So identity is basically how your gender, your race, your age, your education level, whatever, how that makes you a target of specific types of information and propaganda, okay? And how to make yourself less vulnerable to that, and what happens when you encounter people with different and opposing views. And we, just a quick recap, this was our little diagram, our diagram where we are the passive recipients of a lot of information and a lot of persuasion, and what we want was basically to reverse this, so that rather than just being passive recipients, we, just sitting there saying, oh, so this is what this person said, oh, that's wrong, and this is what's going on in the world, we can actually sort of fight back with our minds, okay? How do we do that? By becoming independent thinkers. And the reason why the arrows direct that way is because if we are less vulnerable to their devices and techniques, then it means that it will change their behavior. So imagine politicians not saying anything they want to say just so that they can get votes. It'll actually force them to think through policies. That's the sort of idea. Okay, that's the recap. And now what we're going to do this week is talk about the news. So the news is going to be a huge part of your decision making because last week we talked about preventions. So what we're aiming to do is go to the direct source of what will affect our decisions. So in this case, in the elections, it's manifestos. And we talked about the things that sort of get in the way of getting closely directed, getting in close contact with these sources. And with elections, news is a huge part of it, okay? So the news will interpret, represent, reflect for us on our behalf what's actually going on, what the policies are actually like. They will be making judgments. They'll be selecting stuff, okay? We call this a prevention. That's all last week. So how do we analyze the news? I'm going to talk a bit about the story with those guys in the video and what we did and the system that we came up with called the validity code, the website that we managed to get funding for, and what that is meant to do in a time like this. So I will lay down the conceptual framework. A lot of it is based on philosophy. This is very much a philosophy-based initiative. And a lot of you will come across these sorts of tools in your degrees if you do philosophy degrees, but they're very accessible. Okay, these courses are meant to be accessible to anyone who wants to vote. Okay, so the first distinction is to understand news as it is. News can be a reflection or it can be reporting. What does this mean? When you reflect something, it basically means you're trying to give an accurate representation of it. Just think of a mirror, okay? So when it comes to the news, the sort of reflections, the two types of things we're talking about are words, propositions, sentences, statements, and the actual world. So when I read a huge headline and says there's a volcanic eruption in Fiji, I don't actually have empirical access to that volcanic eruption, right? What I do have is some kind of reflection in it using the words, and the words are meant to somehow attach to reality. So this is something that philosophers call the correspondence theory of truth. It basically says a statement is true if and only if it accurately reflects reality. So the statement, snow is white, is true if and only if snow is actually white. Siana is wearing a grey jacket is true if and only if Siana is actually wearing a grey jacket. If Siana isn't wearing a grey jacket, then that sentence is false. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's pretty intuitive. Okay. So we have X in sort of quotation marks to represent the words, and the world as it is. I know it's a really shady diagram. Like last week, this is not the best, doesn't cover me in glory in terms of my design skills, but there we are. I think we'll get the point. Reporting is being the mirror between this and that. More accurately, between us and the world. Okay. It is also a mirror with an intention. Okay? So when we talk about reflecting sentences onto the world, when it comes to reporting in the news, it's never going to be that full-fledged, hard metaphysics or philosophy of language. Does this statement actually refer to the world as an accurate way as possible? No, the people who report news actually sometimes have incentives not to do so. So, the first thing we need to understand are, who are these people? Okay? Who are our reporters? First thing is to understand that they assume viewer ignorance, okay? As far as I'm concerned, the only reality I have direct access to is between me and my accommodation and where I live, and maybe a few phone calls to my parents or whatever. That's the only thing I have direct access to as far as reality is concerned. My friends, almost everything else that has formed my beliefs has come from some kind of representation. My views about Trump, about climate change, about everything, okay? So when they report on something going on in the world, whether it's about people or about events, they know we don't know. And here are some attributes they have. A reporter has a worldview. This is a common phrase. Think about ideologies, left, right, religious, atheists, the sort of things that we understand. They have a worldview. This means that according to their worldview, they can decide what is important and what is not. For example, if I have a very right-wing worldview and there's a huge volcanic eruption in Fiji, or there's another wave of immigrants that have just crossed the Mediterranean into, Spain or Italy. According to my worldview, the immigration story is more important because it's more salient in my worldview. So that is what I would choose to represent. That's what I'll choose to report on, okay? If my worldview is, I think climate change is a huge thing, well, if there's a banking crisis and there's a plastic crisis in the oceans, my worldview is going to sort of dictate what I think is going to be important. Now, I should say reported. I should also include editors and senior editors. They actually make a huge, but it's their worldviews that we're talking about. That is a big thing, selection, okay? Now, underneath this whole worldview and ideology thing is something that we don't talk a lot about in public discourse, but philosophers in particular know a lot about it. It's a word called paradigm. Has anyone heard of this before? Yes? No? So there is a very famous philosopher of science called Thomas Kuhn in the 1960s who talked about paradigm shifts. That's probably might ring a few more bells. He basically said that there's no such thing as just a pure worldview, okay? The worldview also incorporates a way of thinking, assumptions, ways of inference that lead to the conclusions that you finally lead to. And most importantly, and this is like the big thing about paradigms, it actually dictates what you see and what you don't see. So he uses his example of, there was an experiment done in the 1960s. They got something like 100 participants and they gave them a pack of cards, okay? And they got the people to, each participant to read out the card that was placed in front of them, you know, the number and the suit. But they placed two anomalies in that card. And the anomalies, I think, was a red spade, because we know spades are black, and a black heart, right? And they just got the people to read out what they saw, and I think 58% or something like that people read out the spades as the red spade as heart and the black heart as spade. And what he's trying to say is when you have a paradigm, you actually see different things. That has a huge impact on empiricism, and that means if there is a global economic crisis, but your paradigm says, well, you know, all I see is plastics on the streets and stuff, then perhaps, or you know, in the oceans and stuff, maybe you're literally not going to see the problem. If I'm a right-wing person and, you know, there's a problem with immigration or whatever, I'm not going to see all the other things. This is a huge concept when it comes to reporting, and it dictates what people report. I'm going to talk about, the third thing is intentions. Put all that together and you've got your reporter, okay? There are some things that they might want you to see, some things they will omit that are important, that they don't even know they're omitting themselves, right? Reporters aims, or the system aims at truth, but also uses truth, okay? Some of it is intentional, some of it is not intentional. Now, ThinkCitizen is not here to completely discredit the news production industry or whatever, okay? We think that they're a huge part of the liberal society. They hold a lot of leaders to account. We're just saying they're not perfect, and some of the imperfections are starting to come into play, especially with regards to driving the sensational polarization that we see in politics today. Now we're going to go into describing what our validity code is, and here are a few more concepts. In philosophy, you talk about truth, but not with a capital T, more like small t, so we don't talk about truth as in the meaning of life, more like what makes a simple statement true? You know, this bottle is blue. What makes that statement true? So truth can be defined as an accurate mirror. No, X actually accurately reflects reality. Excuse my diagram. Falsity is pretty simple. If that says X and reality is Y, then that's false. So far, so good? We're going to introduce a new concept. It's called untruth. It's not full-blown true, it's not false, but there are complications in there somewhere, okay? You know, truth can be exaggerated, X plus 1. Maybe it can be underplayed and understated. Maybe it could be completely, well, the first one's exaggerated. Yeah, that's another, emphasized. Perhaps not even using words, but using other things, pictures. Or it could be made to relate to something completely unrelated, okay? Our job as ThinkCitizens is to spot the complications for the benefit of the public who need to make decisions, in this case, in 3 weeks' time. Why? I explained last week the underlying problem of social division and social polarization, and a lot of it is driven by sensation, especially identity politics, it's just irresistible, and we're very vulnerable. If you go back to that first diagram, just constantly perceiving these persuasive messages. We think the problem is not so much ideological but methodological. Get people to learn how to separate their ideas and their thoughts from their beliefs a little bit so they can talk to one another. What we're not doing in society today, ever since Brexit or whatever, is talking. And I outlined how, we've got 2 elections, 2 referenda. None of them have solved the problems they were meant to solve, and we don't think that this one will. This is a solution that we're trying to propose. Okay, so general tools. Are you guys with me so far? Yes. Fantastic, good. Phew. There are 3 general principles in filtering a news article: validity, justification, and bias. These are fancy terms, but the concepts are actually quite simple. Validity basically says, does the structure of the article guarantee the truth of the headline? Have you guys heard of clickbait? Clickbait, so it is when, and this is by the way very common, a journalist will beef up a headline so that your eye catches it and you can click on it. And then once you read the article, you realize, oh man, it's not as juicy as the article said. So we basically, using all our tools of reasoning and logic and the stuff that we learn in most of our degrees, we treat the article as an argument where the headline is a conclusion. And we use validity. Validity is actually a philosophical term, a system of argument that guarantees truth. So we make sure that the article guarantees the truth of a headline and that, the claims themselves are actually true. Okay. This is in contrast, well, not contrast, but it complements what is commonly referred to as fact-checking. Oh gosh, Barack Obama said this, or Trump said that. Is it true? Will this actually lead to more jobs or whatever? We're not actually questioning the leaders. We're questioning those who have the responsibility of representing reality. Have they played with us a little bit? Okay. And we are arguing whether truth is preserved in their representation. Justifications. Are the claims in the article justified? Are the headlines justified? And bias, and when we look at examples, this is what they almost always commonly do. Is there other information available that could change a reader's judgment of the story? All the time. I can't. Now, they do this sometimes out of necessity. You can't bring all the facts of a story into one article. They only have quotas, or either online or in, hard printed copies and so on. But sometimes it is not the case. Sometimes it is deliberate, and this is dictated by their paradigms and their worldviews. So this system that I'm going to summarize for you, the story goes like this. We started after, this was sort of before Brexit, were you guys here during the whole Brexit campaign? Probably not. Anyway, it started off in January saying that, hey, we're gonna, there's gonna be this referendum in June. And we thought, well, that's ridiculous. We're never gonna vote to leave. It's just, Then by about February, March, the people from the leave side started to be a bit more persuasive. And we realized that there was this gap in understanding. Especially because people from the Remain side, all they did was say, we don't care what reason you have, it's just an absolutely ridiculous proposition. And the guys on this side saying, well, we should always have left, we should never have joined, and rather than reasoning together, all we did was shout at each other, so it was toxic. So I started giving talks, this is just after I finished my philosophy degree, started giving talks about what it is to think like a philosopher about Brexit, and just taught people how to reason a little bit, how to argue with themselves. My friend was actually a Leave supporter. And we argued about Brexit all the time over dinner. All the time. I mean, very respectfully and so on. He's a good friend of mine, he's a really nice guy. And I would always invite him to these talks. But in the talks and the Q&As, he always kept quiet. And one time I did what no speaker should do. I said, hey, you always talk to me over dinner. Why can't you talk and edify, help other people think differently? And he says, Ciano, I can't let these guys know that I'm pro-Leave. Well, I was like, why the hell not? Because they think I'm a racist and a bigot, and I think, well, that's ridiculous. Anyone who knows you knows that you're not this. And he says, well, that's what you think. And from then on, I started to see how he was represented in the news. And then I asked myself, this was about April, how many people are paying lip service to Remain but are actually going to vote Leave? How many people feel that they can't express themselves but are actually going to vote Leave, but in a silent way? And it was about April that I began to think, actually, this might not be a full-on win for Remain, and eventually actually lost. And that's when all these guys, whatever, they came back to my room. I had a huge flat. I was a senior resident or resident advisor, whatever. And a group of philosophers and said, right, what went wrong? You know, what do we do? Do we start our own political party? Do we start our, you know, what on earth do we do? And eventually said, well, the news has a huge part to play in this, you know. And we're meant to be thinkers. We're meant to be a new generation of people. What solution do we have? So we started to formulate ways of filtering the news. And well, when I say filtering the news, I say, when we say that the news is biased, what does that actually mean? You know, we're clever people. We're getting degrees. Well, let's read a news article on what you've done in Logic 1 or in interpreting text. Let's bring it here and solve this problem. And by about October, November, we formulated a system and said, right, these are 13 types of things that news articles do to misguide us. And I spoke to them and I taught it to them and they said, right, teach us how to do this. And we had a trial and it was all, you know, just got pizza and, you know, Coke, whatever in my flat all weekend. We filtered articles from mainstream media to see, does this thing work? And we had a system where we sort of, we said, if an article has no blemish, then we'll give it a green, okay? If it has some blemish, but it doesn't change the overall argument, we'll give it an amber or an orange, just like a traffic light system. And if it's really bad, we'll give it a red. We filtered over 100 articles over that weekend. And only 13% turned out green. So we formalized the system and we just said, right, we need to raise money. We need to form a website. This is, you know, a fundamental problem. And that's the website that you saw in the video, and I'm going to go back to it. So, you are going to see a summary of the systems that we use. Headline, misdirection. Now, imagine my head hurts, okay? So I've got a headache, just done my Latin exam, and or whatever, and I've got a headache. So, is this statement true? Imagine the reality is that I've got a headache. So, it's true. My head hurts and headaches are symptoms of brain tumors. Everything here is true. Headaches are symptoms of brain tumors, and I've got a headache. What's the problem? You think they're related. Always think of intentions. They're there to tempt the reader to think that I've got a tumor. Okay? That's what this headline is trying to tempt people to think. Now, I may or may not have a tumor, but we don't know yet. Headlines do this a lot. So that conclusion is false, and the only time when I think you'll find in a valid structure where your premises are true and your conclusion false is in realism and normativity. So in Bristol it was a second year unit, and it's something about the different types of premises you put into the system, because this actually should not happen. So there we go. Are two truths put together in order to tempt a false inference? And again, I'll go into examples later. Because, by the way, all this comes from what we actually saw articles doing. So this is not just an argument, whatever. We used our tools to detect, and we just gave them names. Okay, so this is actually what goes on and what happens. Now, my head is in excruciating pain. Is that true? So I've got a headache. It's a strong word. So it is true, but in a coarse-grained way. Now, what on earth is this? This is basically a way of saying, it's a way of making sure your identities, it's basically the tool we use to spot exaggeration. So fine-grained and coarse-grained, many of you might have heard this question, are you the same person you were yesterday? In a coarse-grained way, yes. Why? Because I'm the same person, I've still got the same, the intrinsic part of me is still the same, even though I've changed in whatever small ways. But there are those metaphysicians who say that identities are, individuals are, all attributes of an individual are essential to their identity. So I'm not the same person yesterday because I, shed a few skin cells and a few hairs or whatever, and so I'm not the same person. I've gone through events, got heartbroken or had an accident, so I'm not the same person I was yesterday. We basically use this as a tool of detecting exaggeration in news articles. So we take the objects of the events, the individuals, or whatever, and we ask whether the terms used to refer to them actually refer. Excruciating? No. Pain, but excruciating? Maybe not. Again, this is a summary. So what you see people saying, politicians, yes, but yeah, news also does this as well. X was completely wrong, when what they really mean is X was more wrong than right. Now, this is a huge type of, people don't realize this, but this is a huge type of persuasion, because it means if you are arguing about Brexit or about whether to put money in the NHS, whatever, this is the language you will almost definitely come across almost all the time. And why does that mean that it puts your opponent at a distance? Is because it basically says that they are wrong simpliciter. Whereas an independent thinker will say, I still think I'm right, but I appreciate that there are reasons for you to be right as well. I've just made an all things considered judgment. That brings two people into the middle, and you make a proper decision. Selection bias. This is the most common offense that you'll find in the news. So imagine me and a doctor having this conversation. I go and say, hey, my head hurts, I need a note from you saying that I can't do, tomorrow's Latin test or whatever. It says, well, why? What have you been doing lately? It says, my dissertation. I said, okay, fine, just take an aspirin. I said, but you're going to give me this letter, right? Yeah, okay, fine, your head actually hurts. What I might have omitted to tell the doctor was that I was actually drunk last night and somehow ended up sleeping next to my heater, and which is why my head feels like it's going to explode, okay? Selection bias basically means when we're representing arguments or facts or something, we might omit some details that will affect the judgment of the person who's receiving the information. It's a pretty simple concept. Just think about, and also think about paradigms. Sometimes it's not even intentional. Sometimes a reporter or a journalist, whatever, will go to a fact, and because of how they think, their assumptions, their ways of thinking, they will quite literally see some things and not see others. It doesn't need to be intentional, but it's there. What does the reporter not see? And what does the reporter want you not to see? When we were doing the trial in my living room that weekend, we came across certain examples. There was one by, I think it was CNN or something like that. Trump had made a comment about some sort of phantom terrorist attack in Sweden. He said that there was, and it's immigration based, and that's why there's a problem with immigration. But the terror attack actually did not happen. So in the article, the Swedish Prime Minister was quoted as saying, I don't know what this is about. We are for facts, and we're very scientific, and we're democratic, and we just, we do things this way. And, the rest of us are reading it are like, yeah, you go, Madam Prime Minister, you tell him. The quotes used in that article were taken from a speech she made at an environmental conference a week before Trump even made his comment. Okay. Sometimes it is intentional. Oh, and I should say, back here, with exaggeration and identity, so we use it on words, we also use it on statistics. In the 2017 election, there was a huge headline. Most of the main ones, main articles use it. Put the same headline. They said 9 out of 10 hospitals in the UK are overcrowded or something like that. 9 out of 10. Now that's a big figure. And before an election, that's basically saying, right, which party is going to put more funding into the NHS. They said that this statistic came from the Royal College of Physicians report or something, that they study that they've done on all these hospitals and so on. And they said, all right, so what do these statistics say? It said that a hospital is overcrowded if it's 95% full. It is full if it's 85 to 95% full, and below that it's underutilized or whatever. These guys changed the definition of overcrowding to the 85%, not the 95%. So they included both overcrowding and full into one category. And the real figure for overcrowding, i.e. 95% plus, was only 3.5 out of 10, not 9.5 out of 10. False attribution. Gosh, this is an example I actually brought back from memory. I think it was in the 2017 election or something like, 2007 election in Kenya. Now, in Kenya, you've got lots of tribal politics and so on. And many elections, unfortunately, it actually does lead to violence and that sort of civil unrest. And that usually comes from one of the candidates declaring a victory before the other one does. And they always time themselves and say, right, who's gonna, when is the Electoral Commission gonna just about announce the results that we can put in our thing there? And that's how most of these conflicts arise. This headline was published the evening before the election. And so you read this and you think, oh no, here we go again. There's going to be blood on the streets tomorrow. And then you open the article and it's basically the president declaring a victory for democracy, not for himself. And that's where we think, oh gosh, thank goodness. But these guys got what they wanted. They sold goodness knows how many newspapers. Okay. How many people might not have opened that article and would have made a judgment and might have even planned something? So victory here and victory for democracy changes the truth value of this proposition. Technical, there we go. Intentioned. Why are they doing it? They want clicks. They want to sell newspapers. It's good. False contextualization. Yes, this was I think it was a YouTube. It was the title of a YouTube video I read in, I think, 2005. That Alex Ferguson, do you guys know who Alex Ferguson is? He's basically, there's this football club called Manchester United, and their success is mostly due to their manager, who'd been there for like 20 years, who won a lot and kept on winning. I'm a Manchester United fan, and I read this on the YouTube title of the video. Alex Ferguson says he resigns, so, my world just collapses in front of me, and I'm like, no, say it isn't so, and I click. And it's actually Ferguson in an interview saying, I told myself 5 years ago I will resign, but thought better of it. And that's when the world came back together and everything was all right. Okay. False contextualization. Do they take quotes out of context, like in the Sweden and Trump case? Does more information about the context give the claim a different meaning? So just a few more, one more concept. What I've described is correspondence by, truth by correspondence, i.e. do we have direct access to the information that we need, i.e. that report by the NHS or Trump's speech or so on. So when we were filtering the articles, we went straight to these sources. Many times we cannot do that because they are about events. We can't go to, we can't go to Mexico to report on that riot to see whether it was actually 20,000 or just 2,000. We can't do that. So we use a different system called truth by coherence. Basically, do the truths out there in the ether cohere with each other? So if I think that there's, Meghan and Harry got married, and I say, well, the BBC said it, and the statement from the Queen said it, and it was actually on television and whatever, and I put all these together, then you have what's called a coherent system of truth, okay? It's actually a theory of truth used in metaphysics, okay? This is basically second best. We want access to reality, but we're not always going to be there, and we're seldom going to be there. So we basically just ask the other sources, the other newspapers, the government websites, whatever, is this true? And sometimes that's the best we can do. Get the article as close to the source of news as possible. That is our aim. So how are we really different? Just to conclude. ThinkCitizen researchers have their own, we have our own paradigms, okay? So there we are, sitting in my flat, having had a few dominoes and going through all this, and what's his face? Gosh, his name escapes me. It just asks, all this stuff that's meant to, that we're sort of filtering out from journalists, especially their intentions. We're just the same, we're no different, okay? Our ThinkCit researchers have their own paradigms, their own worldviews. When I read stuff about Trump, it does make me angry. When I read stuff about, we didn't quite have someone who was from the right wing, why is this different? And how are we a solution? So, this is how we say that we are a solution. First, our attitude. Especially when it comes to the general election in 3 weeks. You're going to be thrown with facts and figures and arguments. And the only thing this system of chaos is going to ask you is this coherent with my set of beliefs? So hey, immigration is a problem because it takes away the resource, it's a strain on resources or whatever, or the EU is problematic because of X, Y, and Z. And the system that keeps trying to fuel our sentiments and uses our identity asks you, does this fit in with your beliefs, existing set of beliefs? If no, do away with it. And so you'll come across Facebook with all these sort of people putting on posts with almost sometimes cynical ways of trying to put the other people down, And how does this make me feel? ThinkCitizen researchers don't ask this question, right? We ask the most important question is this true, right? So that CNN article, it actually vindicates, no, that one didn't vindicate. Well, it shows that the real enemy, their enemy, is not so much Trump, but the reporter. But we want Trump to be the enemy. That's just the juicy thing that we want. And we just say no. We just want to ask, if I'm anti-Trump, but there's some stuff that the reporter has left out that shows him in a good light, we have to include it, right? We have to be true to reality. And that's the only way we become a new authority over information. In our training, we do the identity course, which is what we did last week, even though it's tailor-made for the elections, but it's on YouTube, I believe. This whole course is getting people, before you start having an argument with other people, before you take on that Trump supporter or that Obama supporter or the pro-Brexit or the anti-Brexit person, you argue with yourself first. And that is hard, right? We've done about 90 courses, well, some of them were the identity course, and 2 people came back and said, we can't do this. I can't argue against my religion. I can't argue against... It's an easy course to follow, but it's a really hard soul-searching thing to do. That's fine if you can't do it, but at least you know what's in play. Behind your identity, behind your beliefs is not so much an argument, but it's feelings. And sometimes that's okay, as long as you know that. So when you go on to this next debate and contest, you at least know what you're dealing with. Even if that person shoots down or whatever, I'm still not going to change, and let's find another way of relating to each other with our different beliefs, okay? ThinkCitizen researchers have to do the identity course. It's a 1-hour course, by the way. Argue with yourself first before you argue with others. And this is where I show you just 1 or 2 examples. So by the way, we cartoonized our photos because we realized, hey, do we realize we actually make news boring by filtering out all the juicy stuff that people actually want to read? So how do we make it interesting? They said, well, just cartoonize the photos. Well, that's when it comes to this sort of stuff, I usually just sit back and say, I don't know much about this. Anyway, so here we are. Here's a ThinkCitizen thingy. Harvey said, the judge said that the BBC infringed was both serious and sensationalist. Was basically the BBC were accused of being serious and of infringing in someone else's right in a serious and sensationalist way. That was a news that the guy filtered from this article. But in this article published by the BBC, they left out sensational. And that's what he filters out here, okay? Now, infringing on rights in a serious way is manageable as far as the BBC's reputation is concerned, because it's meant to be independent and so on. But they certainly don't want to be considered to be sensationalists. That is completely against BBC's, but that's exactly what was the quote that they actually omitted. Another example. Yes, so guess what? This is Daily Mail. Upbeat May Caesars on Tucker's plan will work. So a plan for Brexit, you know, saying that it will work and it will go ahead. And this guy just read the speech and said, can find no evidence that May said that at Chequers. It's just plain simple. And they put it in the headline. Simple stuff. Huge effects. Another one here. Yes, this article was about the effects of AI on employment. So Carney's dark side quote. So future of the technological revolution. So, oh gosh, did I bring that up? No, I didn't click on the link. Sorry, so basically, this guy says that the dark side of the future revolution is going to have negative effects, but that dark side stuff actually came from a quote when he was referring to past technological revolutions, not future. Okay. Exam results. So this one says GCSE results rise despite tough exams, and here's another source saying, well, actually there was a fall by 60 to whatever. They basically didn't include all the statistics to show that that statistic might not be true. And last one. Ah, yes. Low carb diets could shorten life, study suggests. Basic validity check says, actually, the study report says both low and high carbon, high fiber diets could shorten life. And that's what the report said. They just decided to use a low carbon one. What's their motivation for doing that? So, people, and that is our main platform. So, aggregating news. Mail, BBC, Guardian. Right, centre, left. And we put it all into one platform. So people are taken out of their echo chambers. How this was meant to work was we get people to come and become research assistants, and we pay them something like £10 an hour or £10 for each article that they filter. And we make this an egalitarian thing. It's completely targeted towards students, okay? And where this started off in Bristol is we got like about £3,000 from the university. And, you know, all those guys, they were trained, they could filter an article in 45 minutes, probably even less. And that's what we filled this up with. We didn't go much further because we ran out of funding. We were not given any more funding for marketing and so on. And it wasn't like now where it's an election time. Everyone knows there's a problem with the news, but you know, what the heck. Now there's a very big incentive to do it. So this site is dormant. I mean, it's active, but we're not filtering news, okay? And so the aim is, you know, we all graduated and we went our different ways, is to gain enough money from universities or from whoever to say, right, we're going to employ, you know, 5 to 7 research assistants to filter an article from one side of the political spectrum, or two articles a day or something, and just pay them, you know, £10 an hour or something. It goes in their CV. It's 10 times better than any bar job or whatever you're going to get. And most importantly, you can actually present this to your parents, to your family, to the world, and say, well, we know the problems that are happening in our world with the polarization of society that's manifested in Trump and Brexit or whatever. And this is a solution that I'm a part of. So, people, the idea is, I suppose, I finish this and we put this up on YouTube and leave it to us to decide what we do with this. It's a possibility of participation in something quite big, Or, I mean, we could say, hey, we tried, we've done this, it maybe hasn't worked, maybe we can just focus on the courses or something. But I'd just like to open that discussion. And if there are any other questions, then please let me know. For the meantime, I appreciate you coming. And this will go up on YouTube along with the identity course and the course we're going to do on the economy and so on. So, thank you.